One of the world's greatest revolutions began with the most benign of munitions, a snowball. One of the biggest events leading up to full-scale war was all about a drink. Yes, ironic, I know, but this revolution may be more familiar than you think. Hi, my name is Gabe Bauer, and this is Top Shelf History, where we combine great stories with great drinks. This is American Dissent, a drink I am making for you today to commemorate the events leading up to the American Revolution. The American Dissent is composed of 4 ingredients: English breakfast tea, salt, orange bitters, and good old Kentucky bourbon. It's reminiscent of a hot toddy with a few key differences. The first ingredient in our drink is English breakfast tea. Leading up to the American Revolution, America was the largest drinker of tea outside of the British Isles, consuming up to 1 million pounds every year. When Britain placed taxes on the Americans at the end of the French and Indian War, the Americans were so incensed that they figured, we don't need this crap anymore, and they boycotted. In fact, amidst the anger over the taxes in a war the Americans felt they contributed their fair share to already, the events surrounding the Boston Massacre are rather interesting. A lone British soldier is patrolling outside the customs house in Boston when he was made the victim of the crowd's anger that evening when Bostonians descended down upon him. They berated him with slurs and eventually unleashed their first weapons, snowballs. From there, things continued to escalate. Soldiers came to the patrolman's aid, and we know the story from there, with 5 Americans dead in the snow. But it's just incredible to think, a snowball, of all things, being the first physical ammunition fired against the Brits prior to the Revolutionary War. Our next ingredient here is salt. Now I'm using this to symbolize where the tea ended up at the end of the Boston Tea Party, at the bottom of the harbor. When I first experimented making this drink, I actually brewed the tea in salt water, and yeah, it was awful. The next ingredient we will add is orange bitters. After all, the feelings between the Brits and the colonists at this time were rather, bitter. So I feel adding a few bitters will be appropriate for our drink. Now, why orange bitters? Well, 1, because citrus was a common ingredient in many 18th century recipes. Well, not as much as nutmeg, but still. And 2, because it will give us a nice aromatic note before we drink. Finally, to really turn this tea into a cocktail, we will add our star ingredient, Kentucky bourbon. After all, what's a drink about the American Revolution without some American spirit? At about 1.5 ounces, this will add a lot of flavor and a little freedom to our drink. Now that we've made our American Dissent, let's see how it tastes. You get that citrus peel, almost like orange peel, right up to your nose on the first smell, but as you taste it, you kind of get a flavor of those orange bitters. And although they're deadened a little bit by the introduction of the salt, because salt will actually mask the bitter receptors on your tongue. So if you have overly bitter tea or coffee, if you take a pinch of salt, it will make it a lot smoother. The same effect happens here in our drink. It masks some of the bitterness from the bitters and also from our tea, but they still come in even subtly. It's actually quite nice. And then finally, you have that warm, boozy embrace from the Kentucky bourbon that is really quite awesome. It's something that I would imagine the Americans would enjoy after a night of protesting in the snow. It would be a wonderful nightcap as they kind of drift off to sleep, planning their next move for victory. Hear that bell? It's last call. Okay, so about 100 colonists walk out of a bar and they're wearing really bad, unconvincing Native American garb. And no, this isn't a joke. This was the Boston Tea Party. They all decided to get on 3 ships. There was the Dartmouth and the Beaver and the Eleanor. And these were American-owned ships trading stuff for the British East India Trading Company. And these guys decided to board these ships, and they cracked open the crates of the tea and they tossed this stuff overboard. There was 90,000 pounds of tea, 45 tons. It took these guys 3 hours to toss all of this tea into Griffin's Wharf. The entire time in Boston, there were 2,000 British troops there. There were probably troops watching the entire thing go down. Did they do anything about it? No. Why? Probably because they were thinking, it's the American merchants are probably hurting it. It's really not really worth it because there's all these other Americans here that are kind of supporting them, and we don't want to have the whole Boston Massacre thing happen again because that was 3 years ago and horrible for all of them. Let's also not forget the fact that there was a massive galleon, big warship out in the harbor that was kind of facing Boston the whole time. Did they do anything about this entire event going down? No. And then after the 3 hours that they were chucking tea into the harbor like it was nobody's business, they get off the ships and they leave. One guy gets arrested. Francis Ackley gets arrested and then he gets imprisoned. Out of 100. What were the British doing? Were they just like, it's fine. It's fine. They're not really hurting us. They're hurting themselves. Who cares? Besides, by the time that King George finds out about this, they'll pass the Coercive Acts and then we get to really be mean. But let's also not forget, too, that there was a second Boston Tea Party not too long later, in March of 1774, and they tossed 30 crates into the Boston Harbor. And then there was also 3 more, one in New York, another one in South Carolina, another one in Maryland. Why do we not hear about these? Because nobody cares about those. It's all about Boston. Thank you so much for watching. If you'd like to try out this recipe for yourself, you can find it at my website at topshelfhistory.com. There we also have all of our blogs, videos, and other recipes, and you can also find me getting super nerdy in today's deep dive for the Boston Tea Party. From all of us here at Top Shelf History, cheers.